how to do it. My goal is at the end of the session, you'll have a set of tools to understand what a good speaker looks like and how to convey what you're saying convincingly. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. So I'm going to give you a tool set. All right? And this whole time, I want you all to think about all the times you've publicly stood up and talked, or the things coming up, or when you're going to use this. Ultimately, this is a tool set. Let's get going. So the first thing we're going to talk about, and there are about 4 or 5 main points, is the story. How many people here remember their last math class? Raise your hand. Let's go. How many people remember what was said and all the topics covered? How many people remember your childhood stories that your mom read you? Or your early stories? Dr. Seuss books. How many people remember Dr. Seuss books that have heard them? Why? Why do you remember a story from 20 years ago? Okay, in my case, a long time before that. But in your case, 15, 20 years ago. But you can't remember something from a few weeks ago. Your brains are designed to remember stories. Things that are consistent, that all gel together into a single idea. This is what a story is. If you stand before people and you give them a list of facts, they probably won't even remember until the end of the discussion. It's just not how the brain works. We remember stories because stories are consistent. They contain emotional appeals and concepts of which the brain can retain. So my first statement in what we're talking about is the basic construct of almost everything you're going to talk about is a story. At some level, it's a story. My story is about telling you how to speak, how to make yourself. That's why I'm asking you to imagine yourselves talking. It brings you into my story. And that's the second part to it. It's about them. You don't really give a shit about me, but you do care about your own. The more I involve you in my story, the more I bring you into my universe, the more you see yourself, the more it becomes important to you. As a speaker, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is using the constant phrase, I. It's not about you. The hero of the story is them. If you are the hero, it's nice. They might be listening. But if they're the hero, boy, they feel good. You'll notice I'm engaging you constantly as we talk now into making it your story about how he's going to get up and publicly speak next week, how he's going to pitch. This is important. It makes it, your brain will naturally pay attention to it. So it's about them. It's a story that's got consistency, and it's simple. Let me explain what I mean by simple. You just got done in the last talk you attended. I want you all to think about the last talk you attended here. How many things do you remember about? How many key points do you remember from it? How many people remember 20 things? 10. 5. 2. Maybe 1. Okay, a few. No retention. What the fuck is the purpose? If you're speaking, you need to keep it simple. Few things done well that they retain is more valuable. Almost all speaking engagements are about getting a meeting or getting a follow-on, not information transference. At the end of this talk, I'm going to give you a bit.ly link, which has all the information you need. What I care about is that you care enough at the end of this to bother to go to the link. That's all I have to accomplish. Because you're not going to retain everything I say. You need a reference list. So you have it. There you go. At the end of this, give you a bit.ly link. You have all the details. All right. Simple. Story. It's about them. Let's move on to the next part. And you've noticed I've started to do this. Your voice. Anytime when someone talks in a monotone, no matter how interesting they say it, if they continue along the same pattern, your brain simply goes to ignore mode. Why? Because your brains are trained to notice delta, differences, contrast, changes, movement. Anything that is flat and consistent is ignored. Anybody married for a large period of time? You'll know this. The rest of you will figure it out soon enough. My point is if you are talking in monotone, if your voice is not interesting, their brains will go into standby. They will go to their email. What does that mean? I'm going to give you a few examples. Variance in amplitude. You'll notice I'm going up and down. Not randomly. That's annoying. But when I want to make a point, I'll go up or down. Tempo. Sometimes you can talk very fast because you want to make a lot of interesting things. And then you stop. All of a sudden, people listen. Pauses, silence is exclamation points. You don't have punctuation when you speak. Your voice is the punctuation. If I want to make a really big point, I do not shout. I add silence. Remember that point about contrast? Silence causes the next word to become emphatic. Because your brain is waiting. It goes, what's going on? What happened? Why is it silent? Is something about to jump me? Automatically enhances its senses. Silence is an exclamation point. Don't overuse it, but use it well. It drives attention. So, let's talk about when you go louder and softer. Normally, you go louder and softer, convey an emotion. If you're excited, you'll talk a little quicker like this. You can feel the excitement. I don't have to say, I'm excited. That's a waste of time. Or if I'm making a very serious point, I slow down the pace to make sure you hear me. Your brain immediately recognizes that the slower pace means something important. It just naturally does. We exploit this in your public speaking. Faster and slower, louder and softer, groups of words. All of them are there. Pauses are used for emphasis. Right? Those are all part of it. How do you do this? You all know how to do this. Go home tonight, find a children's book. Dr. Seuss, anything. Read it to a child. All of you will automatically do exactly what everybody else does. Peter Rabbit. They start doing Peter Rabbit. They play around with the words because you have it. You automatically emote to a child. You automatically do it because you know that that is how children learn. You add body language. You add voice. You imitate the rabbit. Public speaking is very similar. VCs, they're very similar to children, really. My point is that you add information by the way you read it. You're going to do the same thing when you publicly speak. Please do not go, oh, that's so cute to the VC. That's probably not good. But the concept is the same. Reading to children is an excellent way for you to understand your own style of emphasis, of conveying information. Just don't take it too far.
If anybody wants a practice session, I have a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
We can bring them in.
There you go. They'll rent them out for $10 an hour. It's a new app.
Yeah.
Great. It'll be their new business.
It's a little weird, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally.
The last thing is confidence. I want to make a very specific point. Your voice contains a lot of information about how sure you are of what you're conveying. So far when I've been speaking to you, does anybody doubt that I don't know what's going on here? Why? When you do what's called an off fall, you fall off and sort of wander this way, that drops the confidence. You'll notice that there is occasion where you do that, but it's fairly rare. Where you'll hear me tail off into the end of the sentence. This is important, and I make that specifically because a lot of people present, and as soon as they get to their revenues or whatever, then they start sort of telling off like, holy come on. You don't even notice it, but the VCs, they don't know why, but they don't, something seems wrong. 4 million revenue. Really, confidence is important. We're going to talk more about that on the next slide. So we've talked about story, right? Keeping it simple, consistent storyline. We've talked about your voice, being confident. Tempo, amplitude, coming up and down, like reading a children's book. We're going to go on to body language. I'm going to give an example. So Body language can be really important and you really never notice it, because if you do things like pace back and forth, it's fucking distracting. But you don't even notice it. So here's my first statement on body language. It's used for emphasis like punctuation. Here's an example. I want her to pay attention to something. Notice the hand gesture? I'm actually guiding her eyes to mine. This is a way for me to engage, say, someone working on her email that I want to bring back into the conversation. You can use things like chopping motions, spreading motions. All these are all usable. Here's the basic guidelines. There are cultural norms. That's the first statement. In the United States, a small amount of hand gestures is normal. An extremely large amount, they think you're Italian. And not so good. In Italy, it's very normal to do that. In Japan, it's much quieter motions. So there are some cultural norms, but you should decide what's your sort of basic set of motions. Right? Here's some basic guidelines. The first one is, I'm going to talk about eye contact. If you want to make a point, you got to look somebody in the eye. It is really, really easy, if somebody's not looking up doing this, it's really easy to ignore them. Why? I want you to think about it. Whenever somebody makes eye contact with you, do you notice it's really hard not to look back? It's not that you can't, it's really hard. We are trained to make eye contact, so you're going to exploit it. You're talking to a big crowd, you're going to make brief eye contact and move throughout the crowd. The thing is, you're not actually sure who I'm looking at, so everybody in the area thinks I'm looking at them. And they all pop up, and their attentions are grabbed. Even if they're not looking at me just before, you ever seen this thing where you sense somebody's looking at you? This sort of idea like, hey, what, you sort of look up. Same thing. All I have to be is be within the general area. And immediately your brain perceives it needs to look. It just does. It's trained to do it. Not too long, because if you look too long, people get really nervous. They start wondering what's going on.
I'm totally insane.
Yeah. Small, brief eye contact, moving through the crowd. You make a point, you make a point, you make a point, and you move on. Much harder to ignore someone when there's eye contact. Hand gestures I talked briefly about. They should be small and consistent. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 as examples. Please do not use my exact ones, whatever you're natural with. I use this oftentimes if I see someone doing email because it guides their eyes back up to mine. This is a pleasant gesture. You can use this sort of chopping, splitting, these sort of things depending upon if you're doing like a graph or a chart or whatever. But you'll also notice that I tend to do these sort of vague, these sort of circulars, which is generally moved with my body. It's just a consistent movement. And what it does is it makes me look more natural. I'm actually fairly nervous. I'm always nervous. It just is, because I'm publicly speaking. But you don't really sense that, because the motions are actually fluid. So small hands, emphasis points, things like that. You can use them for counting this point, this point, this point. Just don't overuse that, please. Watch out for cultural norms. Counting with your middle finger in the US is a bad idea. I believe this one is the one in Russia that you're not supposed to do. I think, yep. So I've found almost all the bad gestures in all the countries by accidentally doing them all. So try to figure it out if there are some cultural norms. I understand I upset a very large group of Japanese one time with something, and I'm not even sure what I did. But nonetheless, I'm pretty sure I won't do that again. So my point is, limit them, make eye contact, but they should be fluid to what you're saying. I'm going to talk briefly about some content here. I'm just cover this briefly, because this is a whole section in itself. Okay. It's a little tired, so I'll try to cover it before your next yawn. Here we go. Here's my challenge. All right, here we go. We said this already. Keep it simple. You're only going to remember a few pieces of information. You need to choose what that information is. Do not let them randomly remember random crap about your company. You're going to make a few key points and drive them home. That's why we want things simple. Enough few key points and they'll remember. Emotion is more valuable than accuracy. Really, if you love their story, if they love your story about your company, they won't remember any of the facts, but they remember they liked it. Emotions, high retention on emotion. When you like something or you hate something, you remember it. Keep track of that. Think story, not facts. One saying, I love this one. We're the best in the world. I get this a lot. I get pitched this all the time. all these times, these people come up to me and say, we're the best in the world, we've got the greatest team ever, we've got the most valuable product, or we are amazing. Here's the problem with this. You are asserting your own greatness. Not very valuable. Public speaking, look for something that validates what you're saying. We won this award. This guy over here gave me an award. See, I'm awesome. He gave me an award. Okay, maybe not him, but other people that have some authority. But my point is try to avoid hyperbole. Remember the contrast statement? If I say, I'm awesome, I'm awesome, I'm awesome, yeah, there's a few people that might be convinced, but mostly what you've actually done is pushed all the rest of your information down in priority. Right? Because after a while, if someone is screaming at you at the top of their lungs, after a few minutes, you stop hearing anything. It's all the same. Use best, amazing, selectively. Use it at the right moment, not all over the place. And validate it if you can. Questions, selectively. I can ask a question to the crowd. I'd like to, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Here's two rules of that. Small groups, fine, especially if you want interaction. We do this all the time for learning. If you're pitching a group, though, questions are dangerous. You don't know what the answer is going to be, things like that. So use them selectively. It is common for people doing pitches to get up and say something like, when was the last time you went to the bathroom and fell down? Or something else. These are questions they don't want answers to. Right? I forget the correct way that that's phrased. The point is they're good in that they engage you into thinking. I got you to think about going to the bathroom. Well, maybe I didn't want to, but you probably did instantaneously for a moment there and think about, like, why would I fall down and go to the bathroom? So they're good in that they're engaging. Questions can be used for that. But they need to be relevant to your pitch. Or people just find them annoying. Okay? But they can be used, and they can grab attention. You notice I'm constantly sort of involving you in my story? I started talking about this. I said, come into my story, come into my story. What about you when you go to pitch? What about you when you're public speaking next week? The more, again, back to that same thing. People care about themselves more than they care about you. So engage them. Figure out a way to engage them in your story. Make your story relatable to them. Okay? Contrast. I've made this point a couple of times. I'm going to give you some examples of contrast. Before and after. Before our product, after our product. Yesterday, today. Anything that creates a sense of contrast. Tall and short. Right? Easy and hard. The brain looks at information in contrast. It never looks at it as an absolute. It's not the color red, it's the color red with a black background. Colors are one of the easiest ways to understand this. You can look at this wall, you can look at almost anything, right? Black on white stands out. If you put that on black, maybe different. Contrast is how the brain looks at things. Always when you're telling a story, know who the hero is, know the contrast. So if your product, you want to make your product look good, compare it against something that's really shitty. Microsoft did this for years. Every time they release a new Windows, they tell you how shitty the last Windows was to make the new one look better. They're creating contrast. Almost every software person does their new version. Amazing! The last version's terrible, right? 6 months later, the new version, amazing. That last one we told you was great. It sucks, right? They're creating contrast. Otherwise, you're not buying something. Apple does this amazingly, right? Who the hell cares if I tap and hold my finger on the screen on an iPhone? People pay all kinds of money for that. It's a dumb feature, but they created contrast. And the contrast was either have the new stuff or you're old. That's contrast. Who really, if you think about that, who cares? Well, they made you care. Millions and millions of people suddenly cared. Contrast. Repeat key points. There's really, if you're lucky, they're going to retain a few key points. Repeat them again and again. It's not unusual for people to mention the same key idea 3 times in a 2-minute pitch. Very common. One word of note, because we didn't have somebody do this too much, simply taking the same phrase and repeating it again and again and again, they sort of notice it gets annoying. Usually you rephrase it slightly, unless it's a catchphrase. Sometimes you have a catchphrase. You want to remember a catchphrase, like we're the rocket of something or other, in which case you do repeat it, because the whole idea is that what they remember is your catchphrase. Right? Rule of 3. The way the brain works, for short-term memory is having 3 choices or having 3 points is fairly easy to remember. You can remember 3 facts. Well, most of you anyway. Can remember 3 facts and still function on a regular basis. That is, you can get up, you can get a drink, you can go back to your computer, and you still sort of remember 3 facts. 4 does not work that way. As soon as you get up to do something, as soon as you're interrupted, there's a moderate chance you'll forget one of them. Try not to make more than 3 points. At any given time, there's something called a blob, which basically means a single thought or information contained into 3. Try to avoid 4 points on the slide, trying to make 4 things, trying to get them to remember 4 things. It generally doesn't work. There are exceptions, but without longer discussion, try to limit it to 3. Okay? All right, we're almost done. Yay! We're going to cover a few other things. Antics. Antics. We do this a lot, catching attention. We had one guy who, threw down a big stack of paper. We had people throw things into the crowd. Here's my 2 statements on antics. Please test them ahead of time. Cultural norms, things like that. Make sure you test them ahead. Some people find them appropriate. Make sure that they're effective. Random things that have nothing to do with your company, people see as a stupid antic. And it discredits you as a speaker. It means you didn't practice, you're not paying attention. You need to make sure that it's relevant. Same thing with humor. Test your humor carefully. Humor is great, especially if it's relevant. But if it's not relevant or it doesn't land, it's really embarrassing. Again, I want you to think about what convinces you. If somebody's talking to you, somebody comes up, for a moment we're going to take a situation I'm totally unfamiliar with, but nonetheless I think maybe you guys know. It's called dating. I've tried it once, didn't work well. But let's imagine you go out on a date and you first meet someone. And the first thing they do is give you a horrible joke that really is just dumb to you. That's your first impression. It is really sticky to get past that first impression. Their brain, the brain, has already stored its decision. You now must overcome this enormous hurdle to bring them back the other way. First impressions are formed oftentimes in 3 seconds or less. If you stand up and you do a joke and it's not funny or not relevant, that's your first impression. So be careful with humor. If it's done well, it's great. If it's done poorly, it's really bad. Test, test, test. Humor and antics are the ones you should be testing more than almost anything else because they're difficult to pull off. All right? And maybe that's also because I'm just not funny, so maybe you guys will be easier with it, but practice those. Smile. All right, we're going to cover something interesting. If someone comes up and they're just smiling and energetic, it's hard not to smile back. Guess what happens when you start smiling? Guess what happens to your brain chemistry? It changes. Most people assume that your emotions drive your physical behavior. I'm happy, therefore I smile. Most people don't realize it goes the other way as well. If you say to someone, if someone smiles, the brain automatically assumes they're happy. It actually works in reverse. When you smile, it's really hard for people not to smile back. It just works that way. And the brain becomes more receptive. And you get a positive impression. It is actually a fairly powerful tool. There are exceptions. We had a couple people pitch who purposely wanted a more serious message. That's fine. But know that it's an opportunity, that it's something you can do. Smiling does help. Smiling with eye contact will drive a lot of positive behavior. Okay. I'm going to cover this last one because I've been doing this for a while and this bugs me. When you go to do a public talk, like this one or your speech, some people sit down and they literally write word for word of what they want to say. Here it is. It doesn't fucking work. Please don't do it. Unless you are trained to read teleprompters, it's not going to work. But here's why. In order for your brain to process word for word, it must retain a word for word, which takes so much energy and brain power that it leaves no capacity for things like natural motion and hand gestures. You sound like a robot. You don't hear it, but everybody else does. I can spot someone who has written a thing word for word in 5 seconds or less almost every time. They sound emotionless. Because the same energy, all the brain that's being diverted for retention, for memory, takes away from the capacity. The brain simply doesn't have capacity to the emotion, so it cuts off that section. It drops to a flat tone, because that's all it's got capacity for. Write down your key bullet points, the points you want to make. Allow your brain to fill in the little words. It just will. You will talk about it in a natural way. Most of you can sit down and have a reasonable conversation with someone. Sit down on a date yesterday. It probably went, no, it didn't go great. But maybe the point is that we naturally can have conversation when you sit down. This is a conversation. I happen to be having it with a lot of you. It's just a conversation. So don't try to get every word. Get the key points. The emotion and the natural emotions are worth more than the precision use of words. All right. As promised, this is a bit.ly. Take a picture of it. Please remember, bit.ly has lower and upper cases, things like that. Contained here, you'll find like a 2 or 3 page outline of everything I've just talked about with a whole lot more information. When and how certain things are appropriate, how to test things out, a bunch of other things like that. It's basically just my note sheet. Okay?
Rob,
Yep.
can I send these slides out after?
You can do whatever you like. It's all yours.
I will also send them out. You don't have to take a picture.
Thanks.
Yep. Slides will be available for $19.95. By that I mean $19,995. All right. This is the end of my discussion talk. What I'm going to do now is, how much time do I have, Chelsea?
We're pushing them back, so how much time do you need? We have like 10, 15 minutes.
This is an infinite thing. I mean, it's just an open discussion. So I'll tell you what, I will do 10 minutes of Q&A, sort of challenges or questions or things you have, and then just wave at me when the 10 minutes end.
Sure.
How's that? All right. So before we begin, I want you to think about a challenge you faced, you publicly spoke, or something you're about to do. I want to hear something you're going to do, not a theoretical question. Okay? How can I help you?
What would you recommend about the accents?
Accents. Angelica. So there's my answer for that one. We have someone who comes in who specifically works on accents. And she's very good. She will train you to get rid of enough of an accent where people can understand you. Minus that, that's my first pick. My second one is word selection. Go through what you're going to say and put words in that people can understand. Cross off all the words that people don't understand that you say. Remove them from the talk. It's unfortunate, but necessary. That's the second one. The third one is you talk about 10% slower. The more you pause, the more easy it is for the receiver to comprehend the information. Lastly, content. You put more text on your slide so they can read the slide. If they can't understand you, they can read the slide. Yeah?
How do you practice?
How do you practice? Get up and do it a lot is one, but I'm going to give you a more specific one. One of the things we're going to do for you guys is we're going to give you lots of time to get up and practice here. But the other thing, a lot of times what I do is I'll put a phone on one of these stands or whatever and record myself giving the talk. But it's important that you really simulate it. Slides, clicks, everything. Right? Because what you don't want to do is do this on demo day, right? Looking for your clicker. So practice it as real as you can, as close as you can. The closer you practice to the actual situation, the more relaxed you'll be. Because the brain recognizes what's happening and goes into autopilot. The further away you practice, the less similar, the more the brain has to process the deltas, the less mental energy you have. Here's the thing about the videos. You can watch them because you can spot a lot of your own stuff, but have somebody else watch them too, if you can. They'll feel uncomfortable or notice things as well. But a lot of it is just doing it. 100 practice runs is not unusual for a pitch. Okay? Questions? We've got a couple more minutes.
Do you feel like
I feel great. Go ahead. What was the question?
I have like a general. I have a question about generationally, but
Okay.
I think that a lot of the fully prepared and like structured. This is my point. X, Y, Z.
Right.
Even like these types of things feels like generationally maybe more common, but I feel like specifically the millennial generation a more just natural speaking tone and voice and pacing and even maybe more
Formal versus informal.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
think is
a
what
lot
you're
of
getting
times informality is winsome. And so do you ever
Okay.
feel like maybe practicing 100 times kind of goes against the informality?
Okay, so let's start off with there's actually 3 completely different thoughts there. Formal versus informal speaking.
Yeah.
If you watch me get up on stage at a TED Talk, you'll notice my tone and methods are different
Yeah.
than if I'm pitching a VC, than if I'm, say, working with a bunch of startups like this.
Yeah.
So the first thing is appropriateness for the crowd. If your crowd is 65-year-old insurance brokers, you're not going to talk the same as if it's 18-year-old high school, right? So that's my first thing. formality has to be set to the crowd. You have to know what that is. So
Yeah.
I want to be careful about your statement of whimsical. Whimsical might be only appropriate for certain crowds and not others.
Yeah.
And therefore, tone, pace, content, slides are all delta.
So can you talk about demo day then? What is
So
that?
demo day, you're
Maybe
targeting
everyone's gonna be saying,
45-year-old males. Is the most. I mean, you're targeting slightly. Remember, think about it. Right? They're all going to be wearing their dress shirt. They're all going to be wearing their jacket. Nobody's wearing a tie. They're all wearing jeans. They're all wearing the same shoes. They're like 90% freaking the same. Okay.
45-year-old.
They're literally a bunch of sheep in wool jackets. That's welcome to demo day. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. So you want to show that you're advanced, you want to show you're unique, so you're going to be a little whimsical because if you're too formal, that doesn't look good for a start. So there's a definite target. We'll talk about that specifically in the next 2 weeks. But you're going to show what we call clear understanding. Like you have to be careful. You know, this is my forecast, this is my revenue, this is my team, we're awesome. But at the same time, you're going to have to be interested.
Yeah.
So you have to have some whimsical nature to it. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about interacting with your materials, whether they're
Got it.
slides, videos?
Yeah, so turning around and reading your slides usually doesn't work well. Yeah, and sort of giving it a hug, that sort of doesn't work. So let's talk a little bit about that, although I'm poking a little fun. But here's the thing. You'll notice I don't turn around and look at my slides because I lose you. As soon as you see my back, you're gone. You're back to your email. So the first thing you should always know what's on your slides. You'll also notice I talk about the slides before I click to them. I precede my slides. So I'm going to go back a slide just so I say. I'm going to say, and so here's the bit.ly link. Now I give you the bit.ly link. Why? Anybody want to guess why?
They look like kids.
Otherwise,
You're
it's
in control.
magazine post.
Yeah, you're looking at me.
Yeah.
If I tell you what's coming up on the slide, your brain doesn't switch over right away and I don't lose you. You see it, but it doesn't. It's not a new thing.
Yeah.
Okay, we're all follow shinies. Ooh, shiny! Ooh, shiny! If I precede the information, your brain is still stuck on me. It'll see it, but it won't travel over. If I flip the slide first, what happens? You immediately read the entire slide, probably faster than I talk about it. I've lost you. I didn't get a chance to convey the message. So precede your slides. You can reference them. Sometimes you'll see me reference them with a hand gesture like this or something like that. That's very common. That's fine. If you have an intricate slide, sometimes you'll stand next to it and gesture next to it. But generally speaking, for demo day and most of your stuff, don't. They're investing in you, not your chart. Almost all of you are at seed stage. Pretty much all of you are at seed stage. So most of the investment is about you. Remember that. So I don't want them looking at your charts and graphs. When you're at a C and D and E stage, it's all a big bunch of financials, right? In which case, you could just about sit down and watch the financial guys churn at it for 4 hours. Whatever, leave that to them. For now, I want them on you. Reference, behind gesture lightly, try not to guide them. You don't want them off, you want them on you. One more question. Anyone?
When you
Bueller?
slide, on that, when do slides get in the way?
When do slides get in the way? When they're noisy. Take a
What
look
about
at how much
volume?
information is on most of my slides. It's a
Yeah.
bit of information. I'm doing a training session.
Yeah.
Most of your slides, this is about the limit of information. There's usually a graphic chart and a few phrases, that's it, if you're pitching. If you're training, you have a little bit more information because the point is the training. But most slides are fairly limited.
How do you think about volume of slides, right? I could do a 1, 2, 3 point on one side, or I could do a 1, 2, 3
I think that's a little bit
side.
fine point for this. I think you'll have to decide that as you get to the
So you don't
presentation.
think there's like a best?
Yeah, it depends. It's just not a. I'll have to see slides. All right. All right. Congratulations. You're done. Yay! All fourth be awesome, or I sick Tanya on you. All right, I'm done.